Hello and welcome to this module of the MS-720 exam overview. My name's Paul Balacera. I'm a Teams Technical Specialist at Microsoft, and today I'm going to be covering the topic Plan and Configure Microsoft Teams clients and devices. This topic has two sections. We'll start with the first one, Plan and Configure Microsoft Teams, phones and displays. So let's start with the first item, recommend a Microsoft Teams phone based on business and security requirements. So for this one, you're going to want to get an understanding of what Teams phones are about and why you would use them as opposed to just using a Teams client, for example, on a desktop computer. You'll want to understand the supported features, licensing requirements, and so on. So take a look at that Phones for Microsoft Teams document and get some information on that. You'll want to review the phones that are available in the marketplace, aka.ms/Teams devices. And there you'll see all of the different devices from across the different vendors and see what's available. You'll see when you go there that there's a wide range from basic USB phones that plug into a PC, common area phones with basic functionality, all the way up to executive style phones with video and all the bells and whistles. So you'll want to understand the capabilities across the spectrum when you're making recommendations. For example, you may require one of those very feature-rich video phones for an executive scenario, whereas in a phone that's going to be sitting in a common area like a break room, a lunch room, a hotel lobby, you might require just basic functionality on that phone. There's also the notion of licensing here. Different capabilities are available for a regular phone system license that you would assign to an end user compared with what you would assign to a common area phone or the common area phone license itself. So be aware of those differences. Third-party IP or 3-pip phones are currently supported with Microsoft Teams, but they do have limited functionality, basic core calling functionality if you like. They also have no device management capabilities in the Teams Admin Center, so no administration capabilities. So keep that in mind when making suggestions about types of devices to use. The next item we're going to cover is recommend a Microsoft Teams display based on business and security requirements. Take a look at the details on the slide as far as what a Teams display is. They are different from a Teams phone. They support calling just like a Teams phone does, but they also have support for chat and meetings, calendar integration, file access beyond what the phones support today. They also have a built-in microphone, camera, and speakers, and they support connection to Bluetooth headsets for calling and meetings. Plus, they provide companion experiences for Windows PCs as well. Take a look at the list to see some ideas of the additional functionality that Teams displays support beyond what the phones support. And also check out the overview document second from the bottom of the slide. That'll give you some great insight as to what the Teams display is designed to do and all of those features that I were touching on before. The next item we're going to cover is assign common area phone licenses to common area phones. So a common area phone is a device that's going to live in an open or shared space, something like a hotel lobby or a lunchroom or something like that. The Common Area Phone License or CAP license includes all of the capabilities that are needed to activate that account that's going to be used for the Common Area Phone. You don't need to assign a phone system license separately to that account. The license is assigned to the user account that you create to sign into the phone. The accounts can be created in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center or via PowerShell, just like any other account. In addition to the CAP license, if you will need to configure one of the following options to support PSTN functionality, the ability to make and receive calls over the PSTN network. One would be a calling plan from Microsoft, or you could alternatively use direct routing, or you could use Operator Connect. Our next item is the Deploy Skype for Business Phones or 3-pip topic. So Skype for Business or third-party IP /3-pip phones These are devices that were designed for Skype for Business. However, these will continue to work with Teams. There is an article that you can read to understand what this interop involves, what the supported features are, and so on and so forth. That's at aka.ms/3pip. From a deployment standpoint, there really isn't much to do. These devices will sign in with the user credentials that are configured, and they'll operate with the team service. They will operate with a limited set of functionality. It's called core functionality. You'll see that outlined in the documentation, but there's no additional requirements to set those devices up, whether on the device itself or in the service. We'll move on to the topic, deploy Microsoft Teams phones. So firstly, to manage phones, you have to have the right permissions. So I've listed there which permissions you'll need, but you can review the Teams admin roles article for more details. You'll want to take a look at the manage your devices in Microsoft Teams documentation to really get a sense for what you can do, what the options are, and so on within the device management capabilities of the Teams Admin Center. There's quite a bit to it. A couple of things to be aware of. Configuration profiles are a capability that allow you to manage device settings and features. So things like general settings, setting up a device lock timer, a PIN requirement, any language and regional settings, things like screensavers, the brightness settings, any power settings that you want to apply to those devices, as well as network settings. And you can assign those configuration profiles to individual devices, to groups of devices, and it'll be taken care of for you. Device tags are a great way to organize and group devices together, whether it be by location or other properties. But it makes it a lot easier to identify and filter the devices out inside of the list. So you want to understand what device tags do for you. You want to understand how to create those tags, how you would assign them to devices, and how you can manage those tags, as well as how to use them, how to take advantage of those tags within the Teams Admin Center. Be aware that Teams phones can also be deployed using Intune, provided that the logged in user has an Intune license. So take a look at the deploy Teams phones using Intune documentation to understand the requirements and what you can do with Intune. And then lastly, the Teams IP phone policy commandlet. This can be used to configure various devices, but as far as phones go, you can configure things like hot desking, access to the home screen, and other features using that commandlet. And then you can apply that to all your devices or specific devices, depending on your needs. Next, we're going to cover deploy common area phones. So we discussed some of those concepts already in a prior slide, but common area phones are really deployed and managed in a similar way to Teams phones. They are an Android-based device, so there's some similarities there. They do have their own grouping inside of the Teams Admin Center under the Manage Devices section. As we discussed before, there is a dedicated license for common area phones, and you should know from the previous slides what's involved there, what's included, and how you apply those licenses. Just like a regular Teams phone, you can use the Teams IP phone policy commandlet to configure common area phone features and sign-in experience. In fact, you need to use that commandlet in order to set the common area phones up correctly. The options are not available in the Teams Admin Center today, so take a look at that documentation to understand what you can do with the common area phone settings. Also be aware that common area phone licenses do not include Intune, so you cannot use that to deploy common area phones today. Next, we'll cover the item deploy Microsoft Teams displays. So just like common area phones and Teams phones, these are Android-based devices that have similar attributes to those other devices and therefore are deployed and managed in similar ways. They do have their own section inside of the Teams Admin Center, so you can isolate them and manage them separately from phones and common area phones very easily. Just you can also configure separate configuration policies and tags and assign those to the displays as opposed to ones you might have configured for Teams phones or common area phones. The Teams IP phone policy commandlet again comes into the mix. The displays are a great device for hot desking scenarios for open spaces. So you can use the Teams IP phone policy commandlets to manage that capability in your environment. And lastly, Teams displays can also be deployed using Intune as long as the user being logged into the device has the appropriate licensing. So take a look at the documentation there to understand what's required and what you can do with Intune. Moving into the configure, remote provisioning, and sign-in for Android devices topic. Remote provisioning, it's really designed to simplify provisioning of Android-based Teams devices. So that could include desk phones, displays, and other devices. So effectively what happens is the administrator who has access to the Teams Admin Center, they're going to add device MAC IDs. It can either be done manually, so one by one, or it could be done in bulk using a file. And then generating a verification code that can be sent to somebody who's at a different location who has physical access to the device. And that individual can then basically turn on the device and enter that verification code. And in the Teams Admin Center, the administrator can perform a remote sign-in on the device, and off it goes. It's signed in to the account that's going to be used. So it's really good for scenarios like a common area phone, and it keeps things simple. It makes it more secure. The account credentials don't have to be shared with anybody. The administrator has access to everything they need to get that stood up. So take a look at the documentation at the bottom there, remote provisioning and sign in for Teams Android devices, and get an understanding of what the intention of this capability is, what the steps are that are involved, and hopefully that will help. The next item is update Microsoft Teams devices remotely. So this is something that can be done from the Teams Admin Center. You have to have the correct permissions as listed on the screen there. It applies to Android-based devices, so that will include phones and displays, Teams rooms also referred to as collaboration bars, as well as Teams panels. We haven't even talked about Teams panels yet. But you want to know basically what the options are for using this capability. So firmware updates are the only types of updates that are automatically applied. So you have options there as far as the frequency of those updates, whether you apply it immediately as soon as available, or defer for 30 or 90 days to allow for maybe a targeted group to be updated first. But those are the options that you have. There's also other types of options. If you look to the right, you'll see a screenshot of what the update panel looks like. Those updates outside of the firmware can be done manually. They can also be scheduled as well. So take a look at the documentation, update Microsoft Teams devices remotely at the bottom of the screen, and that will provide all the information you need on this ability within the Teams Admin Center. So that completes section 1. We'll move into section 2, which is plan and configure Microsoft Teams rooms on Windows and Teams rooms on Android. So the first item for section 2, recommend Microsoft Teams rooms based on business and security requirements. The first thing to know is there are 2 types of Microsoft Teams room systems, or MTRs. There's the Microsoft Teams rooms on Windows. These run on Windows 10. They include a certified compute device. It could be an Intel NUC or something similar. And they also include a center room touch console. They typically scale better than Android devices today. So they'll scale up to the largest meeting rooms you can imagine. They support a very wide array of peripherals, team certified peripherals, I should say, and they also support multiple front of room displays. MTRs on Windows can be enrolled in the Teams managed service and that's something included with the Microsoft Teams Room Premium license. We'll discuss a little bit more later on. There's also the MTR on Android, and sometimes you'll hear this referred to as a collaboration bar. These devices, they run basically the same software as a Teams phone or display, and the management of these devices is similar to those devices as well. They're typically designed for smaller spaces, so includes things like huddle rooms or small meeting rooms. They can scale up to medium-sized rooms, and things are sort of getting broader in that respect. They're also available or suitable, I should say, for personal meeting room scenarios. So they can be signed in a personal mode using a specific user account, unlike a Windows-based device. But like an MTR on Windows device, they also can have a center of room touch console attached. They can support HDMI ingest for screen sharing, just like a Windows-based device, and they also have support for multiple front of room displays. There's a lot of things to consider between the two devices. And as you can see at the bottom, I have a link to an article. Go look it up. It's Teams devices for shared spaces feature comparison between Windows and Android, a bit of a mouthful. But take a look at that documentation. It really covers the differences and similarities between the two. And certainly it's worth knowing when you're thinking about what type of device you want to recommend. Our next item in section 2, manage Microsoft Teams Room devices. So MTRs can be self-managed in the Teams Admin Center, or TAC, under devices, and you'll see two options there. One is Teams Rooms on Windows or Teams Rooms on Android. You need to have the right permissions. So as it says there on the screen, Global Admin, Teams Administrator, or Teams Device Administrator. The types of things you can do in terms of device management include things like restarting the devices, downloading the device logs. You can apply settings to the device relating to Teams. You can do things like check the health status of the room itself, any attached peripherals, things like cameras, displays, microphones, and so on. You can see a health a meeting activity history for the device. So it will show things like statistics around those meetings, how many participants, the quality of the calls and connectivity and so on as well at a glance. You can also review the peripherals that are attached to the device, cameras, projectors, and so on and so forth. The Teams meeting room devices need to have either a Microsoft Teams Room Standard or a Microsoft Teams Room Premium license. Again, the difference there is really the standard license allows you to manage the device yourself in the Teams Admin Center. The premium license allows you to enroll the Windows-based devices into the Teams Room Premium service. And that has a lot of benefits to it. We'll discuss in subsequent slides. Take a look at the resources at the bottom, manage Microsoft Teams Rooms, and also look at the remotely managed Microsoft Teams Room device settings documentation. That should have everything relevant to those two topics that you need to be aware of. Continuing on the topic of managing Microsoft Teams Room devices, I wanted to quickly cover the managed service option, which comes with the premium license. So it's a cloud-based IT management and monitoring service. And really what it does is it provides administrators with proactive monitoring of the devices, make sure that they're up to date, not just the device itself, but the peripherals attached to it, provides AI and machine learning based monitoring and troubleshooting capabilities. It's a very powerful service, but basically the intent is to make sure the devices are healthy and ready to perform their duties as soon as they're needed. Today, this service is only available for the MTR and Windows devices, but watch this space. There may be changes coming in that respect. On the right-hand side of the screen, I have a matrix of responsibilities broken down by the DIY option, which you would get with the standard license versus what you would get with the managed services option under the premium license. So take a look at that to understand the benefits of the managed service. Have a look at the resources at the bottom of the screen on the left. That will cover the managed service capabilities and benefits so you can understand what's involved there. And also take a look at the interactive demo if you want to see what it looks like, the administration portal and the experience there as well. Assign an audio conferencing bridge service number to a Microsoft Teams room. So this one is basically giving the device the ability to, when you create a meeting on the device or start a new meeting, allowing people who are joining the meeting to dial in if needed. So both the Microsoft Teams Room Standard and Premium licenses include the audio conferencing feature. So when you license a Teams Room account and enable the audio conferencing option in that license, the account will receive or be assigned the default audio conferencing bridge number that is configured on the tenant. So unless the administrator changes that, it will get the default number. However, the audio conferencing numbers can be changed very easily by editing the settings in the room account. So that's done by going into the Teams Admin Center, going into users, locating the account, and then you'll see an audio conferencing settings section at the bottom of the screen. Clicking edit on that, and then you can go in and make the changes as needed to set the correct number. Now that could be a toll number or a toll-free number if that's been configured as well. But take a look at the documentation, manage audio conferencing settings for users, and that will give you some details on what you can do there. As far as PowerShell goes, there is a ability to do that through the Teams PowerShell module. So the example there, you can see setting the conference room service number to that number there on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So you can use that to do it through PowerShell as well. Configure accounts for Microsoft Teams rooms. So each Microsoft Teams room that you are configuring requires a device account. The exception to that rule, though, is an Android-based device, which you can configure in personal mode. We discussed it earlier, so it could be signed in with a user account. But if it's in a shared space, in a meeting room space, a huddle room, what have you, it's going to use a device account. Review the documentation there, configure accounts for Microsoft Teams rooms. It covers all the different options, the nuances you might need to consider. Things like, am I creating an account in the Azure AD? Is this going to be a synchronized account that's already there? Is this an existing room account that I need to modify? All of that stuff. Have a look at that documentation. These can be new accounts you create from scratch, of course, or they can be existing accounts, existing, say, for example, in a room account that's not Teams enabled, and you could validate that account or modify it as required to make it work with the Teams room. There is a script available called Skype Room Provisioning Script.ps1. Just search for that and you'll find it. But that's available to allow for very simple account creation or validation of existing accounts. So you can use that to make things easy for yourself. Accounts can also be created manually as opposed to using the script. The documentation there, deploy Microsoft Teams rooms with Microsoft 365 or Office 365. That document there describes all the steps involved in creating those accounts manually if that's preferred. And Azure AD, I did mention before that you can use synchronized accounts, but typically it is easier and preferred to use Azure AD accounts. Using synchronized accounts, they can work fine, but if you have issues, it can make it more complex and difficult to troubleshoot those issues. So if you can use Azure AD accounts, that is preferred. It's also recommended to create accounts well ahead of time. So even in the documentation, it'll tell you 2 to 3 weeks. And that's really to allow for propagation, for everything to get provisioned and spun up before you configure the room itself. And lastly, accounts must be licensed. And again, you have the option of using the Microsoft Teams Room Standard or Teams Room Premium options on those devices. Define local users and groups on Microsoft Teams rooms on Windows. So when you first turn on a new Teams Room device, effectively they are configured as an appliance. The Teams app itself runs under the context of a local user account called Skype. And when that account automatically logs into the device, it's in kiosk mode, it's locked down, it's only allowed to run the Teams app itself. There are other capabilities are locked down, so it's secure in and of itself. However, there is a default local admin account on the device, and you should definitely, at the very least, change that password. Um, there's also the option to delete that account altogether. You can create an alternative local administrator account with a different name. You can domain join these devices and use an account that's an AD account to manage these devices as well. There are things to think about there. I would take a look at the Microsoft Teams Room security document to get some ideas of what those concepts are about. There's lots of great information in that article, not just about account security, but other security related concepts. So take a look at that one. So that was the last item on the skills measured list, and wraps up section 2. So I wanted to leave you with some additional resources. Hopefully those will be helpful to you. I appreciate your time watching my session today, and good luck with the exam.